My child, do not move past this moment too quickly. Something about today has shifted in a way you cannot yet see, and before you dismiss the strange feeling that has followed you, before you tell yourself that nothing has changed, pause here and listen closely. What you are about to hear was meant to reach the part of you that has been waiting quietly for an answer. There is something your soulmate wishes they could place directly into your hands tonight, something they have replayed again and again since it happened, and the reason they have not yet found the perfect words is because what took place today touched a place inside them they thought they had learned to hide. They began this day believing they could keep moving exactly as they had before. They believed they could carry their feelings without showing them, protect their pride, keep the distance between you from becoming too uncomfortable, and continue pretending that their heart had everything under control. But today did not allow them to remain untouched. Something happened. Something simple on the surface, yet powerful enough beneath it, that forced them to think about you in a completely different way. And now, whether they admit it aloud or not, they know they cannot continue carrying this message forever. You have wondered more than once why someone can feel so deeply and still remain silent. You have questioned how a connection can seem so strong and yet become surrounded by pauses, uncertainty, unfinished conversations, delayed confessions, and moments where one person appears to be waiting for the other to move first. But understand this, silence does not always mean absence. Sometimes silence is the sound of a heart trying to understand what it is afraid to lose. Your soulmate has been caught in that very place. They have thought about reaching toward you. They have imagined what they might say. They have even rehearsed certain sentences in their mind, only to erase them before they ever become real. Yet today something changed the emotional weight of that hesitation. Today, they were given a moment that made your absence feel louder than your presence ever had. It arrived unexpectedly. There was no warning, no dramatic sign announcing what was coming. One moment they were moving through their ordinary responsibilities, surrounded by normal conversations, familiar faces, distractions, and things they believed deserved their attention. Then something was said, something was shown to them, and suddenly everything inside them became still. They heard your name in a way they were not prepared for. Perhaps it was spoken directly, perhaps someone referred to you without realizing how deeply the mention would affect them, or perhaps something reminded them of you so precisely that it felt almost impossible to ignore. Whatever the doorway was, the result was the same. Your soulmate stopped emotionally in the middle of their day. Their thoughts left the room they were standing in and went immediately toward you. They remembered a conversation. They remembered your expression. They remembered something you once said that they did not fully understand at the time. And then came the part they cannot stop replaying tonight. They realized that you may have understood them far more deeply than they ever allowed themselves to understand you. That realization did not arrive gently. It entered their heart with the force of truth after a long period of avoidance. For a moment they had no answer for themselves. No excuse felt strong enough. No explanation could cover what they suddenly saw. There are moments when a person does not discover new information about someone else. They discover how wrong they were about what they already knew. That is what happened today. Your soulmate began remembering the moments when you showed patience while they were confused, The times you stayed quiet instead of making their uncertainty harder, the moments when your heart was asking for honesty while they gave you hesitation, and the subtle ways you cared that they may once have mistaken for something ordinary. Today those memories returned with a different meaning. They saw that some of the things they once overlooked were actually evidence of how much this connection mattered. And then the question rose inside them, a question they had avoided for longer than they want to admit. What if I waited too long to say what I truly feel? That one thought changed the entire atmosphere of their day. My child, the deepest part of this message is not simply that they thought of you. They have thought about you before. They have carried your memory into quiet nights, unexpected mornings, long drives, crowded rooms, and moments they never told anyone about. What makes today different is that for the first time in a long while, their thoughts were not only about what they feel. Their thoughts became focused on what their silence may have caused you to feel. That shift matters. It is easy for someone to say, I miss them. It is much harder to ask, did my fear make them feel unwanted? It is easy to wonder whether another person still cares. It is harder to confront the possibility that your own hesitation may have created the distance you now fear. Today, your soulmate confronted that possibility. They saw the situation from your side, even if only for a moment, and that moment became impossible to erase. Something someone said to them today became the spark. The person may not even realize the impact of their words. It could have been a friend speaking casually about relationships. It could have been someone describing what happens when two people keep waiting for the right time until the opportunity disappears. It could have been a story about regret, timing, forgiveness, or finally telling someone what they mean before assumptions become permanent. Your soulmate listened without saying much. They may even have acted unaffected. But inside, your name became the only name connected to those words. They wondered whether you had stopped waiting. They wondered whether your heart was becoming tired of unanswered questions. They wondered whether you had finally decided to protect your peace instead of continuing to interpret their silence. And the more they wondered, the more restless they became. Then something even more personal occurred. Your soulmate found themselves looking back at a message, a photograph, a memory, or something connected to you that they had not expected to revisit today. Maybe they searched for it intentionally after that conversation. Maybe it appeared accidentally. But when they saw it, the emotional wall they had carefully maintained began to weaken. They noticed details they had ignored before. They remembered what was happening in their life when that moment was created. They remembered how your presence made them feel before fear complicated everything. And for several seconds, they allowed themselves to stop pretending. They missed you. Not vaguely. Not casually. They missed your energy, the way you understood things they struggled to explain, the way your presence could bring both comfort and intensity into the same room. Most of all, they missed the version of themselves that existed when they believed there was still unlimited time to figure everything out. Time has become part of their fear now. Not because something terrible is about to happen, but because they are beginning to understand that emotional opportunities do not remain frozen forever. People grow. Hearts become wiser. Boundaries become stronger. Someone who once waited endlessly can eventually choose peace. Someone who once needed an explanation can eventually learn to live without one. Your soulmate has sensed this change around you. They may not know every detail of your inner journey, but they feel that something about you is no longer standing in the same place. Your energy has become less willing to chase confusion. You may still care, but caring and waiting are not the same thing. You may still remember, but remembering and accepting uncertainty are not the same thing. That difference has reached them, and today it became impossible for them to dismiss. They began asking themselves questions they have been avoiding. If you stood in front of them tonight and asked, "What do you truly want from me?" would they finally answer? If you asked why they pulled back when their heart wanted to move closer, would they tell you the truth? If you asked whether there had been someone else more important than you, would they admit that the greatest obstacle was often not another person but their own fear of being emotionally exposed? This is where their mind went today. They started imagining a conversation with you, not a fantasy where everything is perfect, but an honest conversation where nothing can hide behind pride. And the more they imagined it, the more they realized there is something specific you deserve to know. Listen carefully, because this is where the message deepens. What happened today was not only a reminder of you. Your soulmate also learned something. The information did not necessarily come as a shocking announcement. It may have arrived through a comment, a realization, an unexpected connection between two pieces of information, or something they finally understood after hearing another person's perspective. But whatever form it took, it changed the way they interpret something from your past together. There was a moment between you that they had carried one meaning for. Today they began to believe that meaning may have been wrong. Perhaps they thought you had stopped caring when you became quieter. Today they considered that you may have become quiet because you were protecting yourself. Perhaps they assumed you were pulling away because your feelings had changed. Today they realized you may have been waiting for them to show you that the connection was mutual. Perhaps they believed your strength meant you did not need reassurance. Today they understood that even strong hearts deserve clarity. And once that realization entered them, it opened another door they had kept locked. They remembered one particular moment with you. Out of all the memories, this one rose above the others. Maybe you were speaking and they avoided giving you a full answer. Maybe you looked at them in a way that asked a question neither of you said aloud. Maybe there was a goodbye that lasted a few seconds longer than usual, a message they read repeatedly but answered too simply, or an opportunity to confess something that passed because they convinced themselves there would be another chance. Today, your soulmate replayed that moment and finally understood what was happening beneath it. You were not demanding perfection. You were waiting for truth. And they were so afraid of saying the wrong thing that they ended up saying too little. That realization hurt them more than they expected. Not because they wished to live in regret, but because today they saw clearly how often fear can disguise itself as patience. They kept telling themselves, "I will speak when the timing is better. I will reach out when I understand my emotions. I will explain everything when life becomes less complicated." But timing kept moving. Life continued becoming life. There was always another reason to postpone vulnerability. Today, however, something interrupted that pattern. Your soulmate felt the uncomfortable possibility that waiting for perfect conditions may be the very thing that causes a meaningful connection to become only a memory. And that is why this message carries urgency without fear. The urgency is emotional. It is the urgency of someone finally recognizing that honesty matters while there is still a chance to offer it. Heaven is not asking you to chase anyone. You are not being told to abandon your boundaries or surrender your dignity to uncertainty. This message is not about forcing a relationship into existence. It is about understanding that something hidden inside this connection is moving toward the surface. Your soulmate is reaching a point where remaining silent feels heavier than taking the risk of being known. Yet there is still something holding them back tonight. This is the part you would not immediately guess. Their greatest fear is not that you will become angry. It is not even that you will reject them. Their deeper fear is that you will listen calmly, understand everything, and then tell them you have already grown beyond the place where their explanation would have changed anything. They fear discovering that the words they once held back have finally arrived after your heart learned how to live without them. That possibility has followed them since what happened earlier today. It has turned ordinary moments into questions. It has made them look at their phone differently. It has made them imagine your reaction before they even know how they will begin. They have drafted the beginning of this conversation in their minds several times. It starts differently each time. In one version they say, "There is something I should have told you a long time ago." In another, they begin by asking how you are because they are afraid to reveal too much too quickly. In another, they imagine being completely brave and simply admitting, "I never stopped caring the way you thought I did." But each version reaches the same obstacle, the part about today. Because today gave them a new reason to speak, and that reason is connected to something they heard about you. Do not rush ahead. The truth is not necessarily what your fear would invent. What they heard was not some dark accusation, nor was it a message designed to create panic. In fact, what they learned challenged something they had quietly believed. Someone spoke about you in a way that made your soulmate defend you internally before they even realized what they were doing. A detail about you was mentioned, and instead of accepting the surface interpretation, your soulmate found themselves thinking, "That is not the whole story. They do not know this person the way I do." That thought revealed more than they expected. Because how could they claim not to care and yet feel protective over the way you were understood? How could they insist that distance had made the connection unimportant and yet feel their heart react when someone spoke about you without knowing your depth? In that instant, they realized they still carry an image of you inside them that has remained untouched by time. They remember your tenderness beneath your strength. They remember the way you sometimes hide disappointment behind composure. They remember that when you truly care, you do not always announce it loudly. And when someone described you too simply today, your soulmate suddenly wanted to tell them, "You do not understand." There is more to them than that. They did not necessarily say those words aloud. But they felt them. And that feeling became the turning point. For months, or perhaps simply for longer than they are comfortable admitting, your soulmate has tried to organize their emotions logically. They have told themselves that if a connection is complicated, it should be easy to walk away from. They have told themselves that if two people are meant to reconnect, circumstances will somehow do all the work. They have tried to place responsibility into timing, destiny, distance, confusion, other people, unfinished healing, and 100 different explanations. Today something stripped those explanations down to one unavoidable truth: at some point, a heart must choose courage. That is what frightens them. Courage sounds beautiful when spoken about from a distance. It feels very different when it requires sending the message you have rewritten 12 times. It feels different when it means admitting, "I misunderstood you." It feels different when it requires saying, "I cared, but I was afraid." It feels different when you must accept that the person on the other side has every right to decide what happens next. Your soulmate understands that now. They know they cannot approach you with half-truths. They cannot reach out simply because they feel lonely tonight and then disappear again when vulnerability becomes uncomfortable. Something about today made them realize that if they speak, they must speak differently than before. They must tell you what actually happened inside them. They must explain why they hesitated. They must admit what they assumed about you. And most importantly, they must reveal the thing they discovered today that made them question everything they thought they understood about your silence. This is where you need to hear another truth, my child. Your growth has been speaking even when you have not. There are forms of communication that do not travel through words. When you stop begging to be understood, people notice. When you stop explaining your worth, people notice. When you begin carrying yourself as someone who deserves mutual effort, even the people who once relied on your patience can feel the difference. Your soulmate has felt that difference. They have noticed that you are harder to read now, not because you are playing games, but because you are no longer giving unlimited emotional access to someone who has not clearly shown where they stand. They sense that your heart has become wiser. This is one reason what happened today affected them so strongly. A part of them suddenly realized that if they want a place in your future, they can no longer depend on your past feelings to hold that place open. That realization has shaken something loose inside them. Tonight, they are thinking about a possibility they once avoided. What if they simply told you everything? Not the edited version. Not the safe version. Not the version designed to protect their image. Everything. They would tell you about the night they nearly contacted you but stopped because they convinced themselves you had already moved forward. They would tell you about the time someone else asked about you and they pretended your name meant less than it did. They would tell you about the jealousy they did not feel entitled to express. They would tell you about how often they compared conversations with others to the emotional depth they once felt with you. They would tell you that there were moments they deliberately distracted themselves because thinking about you brought up emotions they did not know how to handle. But even those confessions are not the biggest thing. There is one sentence they have never said because once spoken, it would change the meaning of nearly everything that happened between you. Today brought that sentence dangerously close to the surface. They understood that there was a period when you may have believed they were choosing a life that did not include you. From the outside, their behavior may have looked exactly like that. Distance can resemble indifference. Hesitation can resemble rejection. Silence can resemble an answer. Yet what they have struggled to explain, even to themselves, is that sometimes they stepped away not because you meant too little, but because you meant enough to expose every insecurity they had kept hidden. You made the connection feel real. Real connections require real choices. And real choices frighten them. With casual people, they could remain guarded without consequence. With you, they felt seen. You noticed shifts in their tone. You sensed when they were pretending to be fine. You could ask one simple question and make them confront something they had avoided for weeks. There were moments when this closeness made them want to come closer, and moments when it made them run emotionally in the opposite direction. They did not always understand why. Today, they finally connected something from their past to the way they behaved with you, and that realization is part of what they want to tell you. There was an old wound guiding new decisions. They had experienced disappointment before. Someone may have taught them that vulnerability becomes a weakness when placed in the wrong hands. Someone may have left after promising they would stay. Perhaps they grew accustomed to relationships where feelings were never spoken plainly. So when you arrived with a connection that demanded emotional honesty, your soulmate found themselves wanting the very thing they feared. Today, they recognized the pattern. That was the revelation. They saw that some of the reasons they gave themselves for staying distant were not actually about you. They were old defenses wearing your name. They blamed timing when they were afraid. They blamed uncertainty when they feared being known. They told themselves they needed more signs when, deep down, they already knew how strongly they felt. And then something happened later in the day that made the entire realization even stronger. They saw or heard something that suggested your life may be changing. It could have been a simple detail. Someone mentioned that you seemed happier. Someone said you were focused on something new. Perhaps they saw an image where there was a different kind of peace in your expression. Perhaps they learned that you were making plans they knew nothing about. Nothing necessarily dramatic happened. Yet to your soulmate, that small information created a powerful thought: you are moving. Your life is moving. Your story is not paused waiting for them. And suddenly, their silence felt like a decision they had never consciously chosen. That frightened them more than any rejection could. They do not want to lose you through inactivity. They do not want to wake up one day and realize the connection ended not because either of you stopped caring, but because neither conversation ever reached the truth. This is why they have been emotionally unsettled since what happened today. Their heart is pressing against the wall their fear built. Yet they still hesitate. Why? Because there is one more thing. The part they need to tell you about today involves another conversation that occurred after the first realization. Your soulmate spoke with someone they trust. They did not reveal everything. At first, they kept the conversation vague. They asked a question that sounded general, something like, "Do you think people can misunderstand each other for too long?" Or, "Do you think someone should say something even if it has been a long time?" They tried to hide who they were talking about. But the person listening knew. They knew your soulmate well enough to recognize the pause before your name. And what that person said next made your soulmate go completely quiet. They told them, in essence, that the biggest mistake would not be admitting they still cared. The bigger mistake would be allowing pride to write the ending of a story their heart never wanted to end. Your soulmate did not respond immediately. Because that sentence reached the exact place they had been trying not to touch. They looked away. They changed the subject briefly. They pretended to consider it logically. But inside, they were remembering you again. Then the person said something else. Something your soulmate had never considered. They asked, "What if they think you never cared?" That question followed your soulmate for the rest of the day. They imagined you carrying that belief. They imagined you looking back at every unanswered moment and concluding that your feelings had never been mutual. They imagined you telling yourself you had simply imagined the depth between you. And suddenly, they could not bear the thought. Because whatever else happened, whatever mistakes were made, whatever fears complicated the path, one thing they know with certainty is that you did not imagine everything. There was something real. There were moments they felt it too. There were times they almost told you. There were nights they missed you in silence. There were moments when losing you frightened them long before they ever admitted that you mattered enough to lose. And now, after everything that happened today, your soulmate is carrying one thought with increasing intensity: you deserve to know. Not because they expect you to erase the past. Not because they assume you will immediately open your heart. But because they are finally beginning to understand the difference between asking for another chance and giving someone the truth they should have received the first time. That is why tonight feels different. Their phone has been near them more than usual. They have opened a conversation and closed it. They have imagined your name appearing on the screen. They have wondered whether you would answer. They have typed words, deleted them, rewritten them in their mind, then told themselves they need a little more courage. But there is something you do not know yet. Before the day ended, your soulmate discovered one final detail connected to you. This was not the same as the earlier conversation. This was not simply someone else's opinion. This detail came from a source they did not expect, and when they understood what it meant, everything inside them became still. For a few seconds, they could only stare. Because it answered a question they had carried about you for a very long time. A question they had never asked you directly. And the answer was not what they believed. It made them realize that one of the most important moments between you had been completely misunderstood. They thought you had made a certain choice because you did not care enough. But today, they discovered the opposite may have been true. You may have made that choice precisely because you cared too much to remain where you were not being chosen clearly. And when your soulmate understood this, they whispered something to themselves that they never expected to say. They said, "I got it wrong." Those 4 words changed everything. Because once a person realizes they misunderstood the heart they were afraid to trust, the past begins rearranging itself. Every old memory gains a new meaning. Every silence becomes a question. Every missed opportunity becomes a doorway they wish they had walked through. Your soulmate began revisiting everything. And while doing so, they remembered one thing you said. One sentence. A sentence they barely responded to when you said it. But tonight, they understand what you were really trying to tell them. And my child, that sentence is connected to the real reason they now feel they must speak to you. Because what happened today did not simply make them miss you. It revealed that you once left a door open for them in a way they never recognized. And the person who pointed this out to them also revealed something else. Something your soulmate was never supposed to hear. Something about what you truly felt during the moment they believed you were already walking away. When those words reached them, their entire expression changed. They asked, "Are you sure?" And the answer they received was yes. That is the moment they knew they could no longer keep pretending today was just another day. Because now they know something about your heart that they did not know this morning. And before they decide what to do next, before they finally send the message they have been afraid to send, there is one truth about that revelation you still have not heard. It is the truth that made them open your conversation one more time tonight, place their fingers over the keyboard, and begin typing the words they have avoided for far too long. I need to tell you what happened today, because I finally understand what you were trying to tell me. There is a reason those words were so difficult for them to type. Your soulmate has written emotional messages before and erased them. They have opened your conversation before and stared at your name. They have imagined explanations, apologies, confessions, and even the possibility of starting again. But this time something is different. This time they are not approaching you with only emotion. They are approaching you with understanding. What they discovered today has forced them to look at a moment from your shared past through completely different eyes, and now they cannot unsee what they finally understand. They thought they knew why you became quiet. They thought they knew why your energy changed. They thought they understood the moment when you stopped trying so hard to make them understand what was inside your heart. But today someone revealed a detail they had never known, and suddenly your silence no longer looked like indifference. It looked like exhaustion. It looked like someone who had cared deeply but could no longer carry a connection alone. That realization struck them harder than they expected because your soulmate had secretly built an entire explanation around your behavior. They told themselves you had simply changed your mind. They told themselves perhaps the connection had meant more to them than it meant to you. At times, they even used your silence as permission to stay silent themselves. It was easier that way. If they could convince themselves that you had stopped caring first, then they did not have to confront the possibility that their hesitation had pushed you toward distance. But today that comfortable explanation began falling apart. Someone who knew more than your soulmate realized said something about you that contradicted the story they had been telling themselves. At first your soulmate resisted it. They asked questions. They tried to find another interpretation. Yet the more they listened, the more certain they became that there had been an entire emotional layer they never understood. And this is where their heart began to race, my child, because the person did not merely say that you had cared. Your soulmate already suspected that somewhere beneath everything. What surprised them was learning how long you had cared after they believed you had already let go. There was a period when your soulmate looked at your distance and assumed the door had closed. They did not know that behind that distance there may still have been questions you wished they would answer. They did not know there were moments when you wanted them to simply step forward and show you that you were not imagining the connection. They did not know how many times you may have chosen silence because speaking again without receiving clarity felt too painful. Today they realized that what looked like you walking away may actually have been you waiting to see whether they would finally meet you halfway. Your soulmate became very quiet when they heard this. The person speaking noticed immediately. They asked whether everything was all right, but your soulmate could barely answer because memories were arriving too quickly. They remembered one of your conversations almost word for word. They remembered a moment when your tone changed slightly, when you stopped asking questions and began accepting whatever answer they gave. At the time, your soulmate interpreted your calmness as proof that you were no longer emotionally invested. Today they saw something entirely different. They realized that perhaps your calmness was not the absence of feeling. Perhaps it was the moment you understood that you could not force someone to give you certainty. And then another memory returned. There had been a moment when you gave them an opportunity to be honest without directly demanding honesty. You may not even remember how significant it was. Perhaps you asked them what they wanted. Perhaps you said something simple about the future. Perhaps you gave them a chance to explain why their behavior and their feelings seemed to contradict each other. Your soulmate remembers how they answered. They chose the safer words. They gave you enough to keep the conversation peaceful but not enough to expose what was truly happening inside them. They believed there would be another opportunity later. Today they understood that you recognized their hesitation immediately. You knew they were holding something back. And instead of forcing it out of them, you allowed them to choose. That is the part that hurts them now. Because they finally understand that you were watching their actions while they were waiting for you to read their heart. They expected you to somehow know what they could not say. They wanted you to understand that their fear was not rejection, that their distance did not mean you were unwanted, that their uncertainty came from the intensity of what they felt. But how could you know all of that when they never gave you the truth clearly? Your soulmate confronted that question today, and for the first time they stopped blaming timing, circumstances, misunderstandings, or anyone else. They asked themselves, what did I actually show them? The answer made them uncomfortable. They showed hesitation when they felt affection. They showed distance when they felt overwhelmed. They showed silence when they desperately wanted reassurance. They waited for you to prove something while giving you very little certainty in return. And then, when you finally protected your own heart, they interpreted it as confirmation of the fear they had created themselves. This realization did not make them hate themselves. It awakened them. There is a difference. Regret that only creates shame changes nothing. But regret that creates understanding can become the beginning of courage. Something inside your soulmate shifted from, I wish things had happened differently, to, I need to take responsibility for what I contributed. That is why the message they began typing tonight does not sound like the messages they imagined sending before. They are no longer trying to impress you. They are no longer searching for some perfect sentence that guarantees the outcome they want. They are beginning to understand that honesty is not a strategy. Honesty is something you offer without controlling what the other person chooses to do with it. But there is still a revelation from today they have not processed completely. The person speaking with your soulmate mentioned a particular day from the past. The moment that day was mentioned, your soulmate immediately knew what they were referring to. Their expression changed. Because that day had remained unresolved in their mind for a long time. Something happened between you then. Maybe it was a conversation that ended too early, a misunderstanding neither of you corrected, or a moment when one of you expected the other to say something that never came. Your soulmate had always believed that day marked the beginning of your emotional withdrawal. They had convinced themselves that something inside you changed because you no longer wanted the same connection. But the person speaking to them today knew something your soulmate did not. They knew what you had said afterward. And when your soulmate heard it, they stopped breathing normally for a moment. Because according to what they were told, you had not walked away from that moment feeling indifferent. You had walked away wondering why someone who seemed to care so deeply was so afraid to show it. Your soulmate asked the person to repeat themselves. They did. Then came another sentence. A sentence your soulmate was not prepared for. They were told that you had once defended them even while you were hurt. Think about what that meant to them. You could have made them the villain of your story. You could have reduced them to their worst moment. You could have allowed disappointment to erase every good thing you had seen inside them. Yet apparently, even while confused, you understood that their behavior came from something more complicated than cruelty or indifference. You recognized fear inside them before they recognized it themselves. Your soulmate felt exposed by that truth. Not exposed in a humiliating way, but seen. Deeply seen. They realized you had understood something about their heart they had spent months trying to hide from everyone, including themselves. And suddenly they remembered why your connection had always felt different. You did not only notice what they said. You noticed what happened between their words. You noticed when their energy changed. You noticed when they became distant immediately after becoming emotionally close. You noticed the contradiction. And instead of using it against them, you waited. Until you could not wait anymore. That is the part they understand now. Your soulmate is beginning to realize that your decision to protect yourself was not punishment. It was self-respect. You were not necessarily trying to make them chase you. You were not creating distance to manipulate their emotions. You reached a point where you understood that love without clarity can become exhausting, and you refused to lose yourself inside unanswered questions. When that realization settled into your soulmate's heart, they experienced something unexpected. Relief. Yes, relief. Because for a long time they had carried the belief that you disappeared emotionally because they were simply not enough for you. That belief became another reason to stay silent. They told themselves, "Why would I reach out if they have already decided I do not matter?" But now they are beginning to see that the story may have been completely different. Perhaps you did not withdraw because they meant nothing. Perhaps you withdrew because the connection meant too much to continue without honesty. And if that is true, then your soulmate must confront another question. What happens if they finally become honest now? That question has been circling them tonight. They do not know the answer. And that uncertainty is precisely what makes this moment meaningful. They cannot control your response. They cannot demand that your heart remain where they left it. They cannot ask time to reverse itself. All they can do is decide what kind of person they will be now that they finally understand what happened. Will they continue hiding? Or will they speak? Your soulmate walked away from today's conversation carrying that question. Everything around them returned to normal, but they did not. People continued talking. Notifications appeared. Responsibilities demanded attention. The world moved as if nothing significant had occurred. Yet internally, your soulmate felt as though someone had opened a locked room and switched on the light. Suddenly they could see things they had spent a long time avoiding. They remembered how many times they had checked whether you were online. They remembered wondering who you were talking to. They remembered feeling something when your attention seemed to move elsewhere and then telling themselves they had no right to feel it. They remembered conversations with other people where they unconsciously compared the emotional connection to you. They remembered trying to convince themselves they were completely fine. And then they laughed quietly at themselves, because today they finally recognized how much energy they had spent pretending not to care about something that clearly mattered. But there was another layer. While thinking about you, your soulmate remembered a promise they once made privately to themselves. You may never have known about it. It was not a promise spoken aloud. It was something they decided during one of those nights when your connection felt particularly intense. They told themselves that if they ever became certain about what they felt, they would tell you. For a long time they used uncertainty as an excuse. Today that excuse disappeared. They are certain about at least one thing now. Whatever name the future gives this connection, whatever direction your lives ultimately take, you matter to them. You still matter. And they do not want you carrying a false story that says otherwise. This is why their message tonight has become less about winning you back and more about finally giving you something you should have received long ago: clarity. But your soulmate has not pressed send yet. Because there is one part of the truth that scares them more than everything else. If they tell you what happened today, they will also have to explain why someone else knew about your feelings while they did not. And that leads to a conversation they never expected to have. The person who revealed these details today had noticed something long before your soulmate did. They had watched your soulmate's behavior whenever your name appeared. They had seen the way their voice changed, the way they became defensive when someone misunderstood you, the way they pretended not to be interested while somehow remembering tiny details about you. Today this person finally confronted them. They said something that made your soulmate uncomfortable. You are acting like you lost someone you never admitted you wanted. Your soulmate tried to laugh it off. But they could not. Because it was true. Then the person asked them one question. If they called you tonight and told you they were leaving your life completely, what would you say? Your soulmate had no prepared answer. They imagined it. They imagined hearing your voice. They imagined realizing there would be no more unfinished possibilities, no future conversation, no someday, no hidden hope that perhaps circumstances would bring you back into each other's lives. And immediately they knew what they would say. Wait. That was the first word that entered their mind. Wait. Not because they want to control you. Not because they believe you owe them another chance. But because there is something they need you to know before you ever make a final decision about what they meant to you. They need you to know that their silence was not the whole truth. They need you to know there were feelings beneath it. They need you to know there were moments they almost chose differently. They need you to know they remember more than you think. And they need you to know what happened today because today finally forced them to admit something they had never been brave enough to admit before. They were afraid of you. Not afraid of who you are. Afraid of what you awakened inside them. You represented the possibility of something real enough to change them. And real love, real closeness, real emotional intimacy asks people to surrender certain defenses. It asks them to risk being misunderstood. It asks them to admit they care before they know whether caring will be rewarded. Your soulmate was not prepared for that when this connection first deepened. They thought strength meant staying in control. Today they realized strength may actually mean telling the truth when the outcome cannot be controlled. And then came another extraordinary moment. After returning home, or after finally finding themselves alone, your soulmate sat quietly and allowed themselves to remember you without resisting. They did not distract themselves. They did not immediately pick up their phone. They simply sat with the memory. And one image kept returning. Your eyes. The way you looked at them during a particular conversation. They understand that look differently tonight. At the time, they thought you were disappointed in them. Now they realize you may have been giving them one final silent opportunity to say what you knew they were hiding. They did not say it. And you looked away. That memory has remained somewhere inside them all this time. Tonight it returned with painful clarity. Your soulmate whispered, "You knew. You knew they cared. You knew they were scared." But knowing someone cares is not the same as being treated with clarity. That is what they finally understand. And this understanding is changing the message they want to send. At first they planned to begin casually. "Hey, how have you been?" They deleted it. It felt too small. Then they considered, "Can we talk?" They deleted that too. It sounded too vague. Then they typed something closer to the truth. "I learned something today that made me realize I owe you an explanation." They stared at those words for a long time. Their thumb hovered near the screen. But before sending it, another thought entered their mind. What if you already know? What if you have always known? What if the truth they are struggling so hard to admit is something your heart understood long ago? That thought changed everything again. Because suddenly your soulmate realized the conversation they need to have with you may not be about revealing their feelings. It may be about finally confirming what you once felt but were never given permission to trust. And there is one particular truth they want to confirm. Something they have denied even when their actions quietly revealed it. They want to tell you that there was a moment when they nearly chose you openly. You never knew. Something happened behind the scenes. A conversation took place. A decision almost changed. Your soulmate came closer to telling you everything than you ever realized. But at the final moment, fear won. And what happened immediately afterward created the misunderstanding that separated you emotionally. Today they finally understood the connection between those events. This is why they need to tell you what happened. Because if you knew what almost happened then, you would understand why their behavior became so confusing afterward. They were not becoming colder because their feelings disappeared. They were becoming more guarded because their feelings had become impossible to deny. But there is more. The person they spoke with today knew about that moment. Your soulmate did not understand how. They asked, "Who told you?"